Hi, everyone. I can see there's still more people coming in, but I think in the interest of time, we'll get underway. And I can see already someone has figured out the Q&A, which is fantastic. Yes, we'll get underway now. I was just posting in the chat that there has been about 140 registrations, and we are sitting now at about 80 participants. So if there are some people that are late, they can just join in. My name is Marcus Foth. I'm the new chair of BFPCA, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land where I'm based here in Meanjin, Brisbane. That's the Yagara and the Turrbal people, north and south of the Brisbane River. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. There's a lot of material that I'm going to be going through, and here's a bit of an overview of what I'm going to cover today. Because there's so many people that have joined us in recent weeks and months, I'm first going to start by just trying to get everyone onto the same page and talk about some of the key issues that we've identified. Obviously, we all know it's about the noise, but in our work, we've actually found some of the underlying causes and issues that go much deeper into this problem. Then in the second part, I'm going to talk about some of the work that BFPCA has been undertaking over the last 2 years and what kind of progress we've made so far. In the third section, we look at a bit of a summary and a recap of what we've achieved. And then we're looking at what's next in section 4, what we've got planned for 2023. And we're very keen to also hear your ideas and your feedback of what kinds of suggestions you have of what priorities and foci areas we should set ourselves for 2023. We'll finish off with a couple of ideas of how you can help, and also hopefully there's some time for Q&A. So some of the key issues that have arisen. So obviously we are dealing with a new aerodrome and flight path architecture that was launched as part of the new parallel runway on the 12th of July, 2020. And here you can see a photo of all 3 levels of government, including the private Brisbane Airport Corporation on launch day. What is interesting about this photo is actually that in the lead up to this big project and the launch of it, all 3 levels of government worked together seamlessly. And now we actually experience the complete opposite. We have finger pointing, we get responses from local and state government that they have no involvement whatsoever. The federal government is saying it's air services. Air services are saying that the capacity is up to the airport. The airport is saying it's up to the noise compliance team of air services. So it's a very intricate system of buck passing that we are witnessing here. This is the new runway. We don't have the issue with the runway per se, but the flight paths. There's nothing wrong with having a second runway if it is designed properly and if the community is adequately and truthfully informed. That wasn't the case here. And also the other thing I want to stress right from the beginning is that BFPCA is not just advocating on behalf of those residents that live under the flight paths connected to the new runway. We are advocating on behalf of all residents in Brisbane that are affected by flight path noise issues. That includes those in the inner city. It includes those all the way out in Samford Valley, Upper Brookfield, some 35 kilometers away. It also includes those under the legacy flight paths. And we're going to be looking at some of those issues that legacy residents are facing. And it also includes those in the Bay Area, because there's a number of flights that whilst they leave the water end or the bay end of those runways, they immediately turn around and overfly residential areas. So we have been listening to all those experiences and that feedback, and BFPCA is passing on those kinds of complaints and those kinds of messages to people in decision-making positions. This is a little video that the airport has launched, a documentary, and I'm just going to play the first couple of seconds here.
It's not very often that an airport adds another runway.
What you see now is a parallel runway doubling the capacity for the coming 40 years. That is long-term thinking.
There was no rule book for this, there was no guidelines or anything. You know, we had to make this one up.
Yes, only 10 seconds into it, and the first time that the truth comes out of Brisbane Airport Corporation. There was no rule book for this, there was no guidebook or anything. We had to just make it up. And truer words have never been spoken, we believe. It literally was made up on the go, enabled largely by various entities working very closely together. So it is very hard to distinguish between those that are supposed to apply scrutiny and review and assessment and approvals, and those that are actually the project proponents. We'll get into that in a little bit as well. So some of the issues that we've identified, the first one is really that a lot of people were either not told at all that this was going on, or if they were told it's all going to be great and nothing to worry about. So the community engagement approach that the airport used was that of a radial point of infrastructure development. So they assumed that the runway is this point in the landscape, and then they drew a circle around it, and they said that they've engaged all residents living within a 5-kilometer radius of the airport, plus some scattergun approaches of handing out show bags at the Echo. So the same entity is also saying that the nearest residence is around 6.7 kilometers away. So there's already quite a discrepancy between the actual genuine commitment towards community engagement and the experience of being either left in the dark, or if engagement did reach you, you probably were told a whole bunch of messages that the airport, the new runway at the airport is going to be great for Brisbane because it's going to create a net reduction in aircraft noise impact over the city because they will fly over the bay. So one of the very first submissions that we've undertaken was to the Aircraft Noise Ombudsman, and we argued that this radial approach to community engagement was wrong. It is not up to industry standards. It should have been a linear one because we are dealing with linear infrastructure here. Linear in the sense that there is highways in the sky being proposed and being built, and the residents and communities underneath those highways in the sky were supposed to be adequately engaged, and we were not. The second big issue is obviously around the entirely incorrect forecasts in the noise modeling and the volume and the frequency. One of the extreme examples here, this is a location in New Farm that to this day is apparently experiencing 0 aircraft noise that would be of nuisance. The other thing you got to imagine is that 70 decibels is very hard to translate into a lived experience. If you just trust the messaging from the airport that says that 70 decibels is the cutoff, it's kind of like the ambient noise in a New Farm cafe, you kind of think, well, that doesn't look too bad. But the lived experience, even using the data from the government's own network of noise monitors, is showing a very different picture. And this is even a picture from the COVID days where aircraft traffic was very severely reduced. So if you fast forward to today, the discrepancy between the forecasts and the environmental impact statement and what we're experiencing now is even more stark. We're also dealing with noise concentration. Rather than having a flight path design that separates arrival and departure flight paths, here we're using, the airport is using technology called an instrument landing system that uses satellite navigation. That means that the same residents are always hit by aircraft noise. If the wind changes and we are switching from arrival to departure, we are also witnessing a concentration of arrival and departure flight paths, which makes the noise concentration even worse. And then even further out, and so you can see Sanford there, as well as further north of Moggle, the upper Brookfield area, the instrument landing system extends and elongates these flight paths all the way into rural areas. They are so far away that they were never even considered in the community engagement, and the airport has admitted to this. This is another drawing of the flight paths over the federal divisions across the larger Brisbane, the greater Brisbane area. And you can again see the flight paths and how far and wide they stretch. And Senate estimates, air services have admitted that they are getting complaints from, and this is already a while back, 169 families and communities in 169 suburbs of Brisbane, when Brisbane total only has 190 suburbs. So this gives you an indication of how far and wide this problem stretches. And it's also, as I said earlier, not limited to inner city as well as the western suburbs there. If you look at the legacy flight paths as well as those leaving over the ocean, you can see a number of those flight paths that are immediately curving around. They're taking cuts over the Redcliffe Peninsula. They're also going back into Redland Bay. So the noise footprint of Brisbane Airport has really been maximized now with the introduction of this new airspace architecture. We've done some work last year where we've been mapping the different schools that are exposed to excessive noise pollution from the flight paths. And you can find out some more information about the school research that we are doing at this website address there, bfpca.org.au/schools. There's also a bunch of peer-reviewed academic research papers that indicate that the noise impact on learning and the cognitive abilities of students is quite detrimental, not only when the students complain, even if they don't complain, if they think that there is nothing wrong with any of the noise, the impact, the negative impact on cognitive abilities will have a detrimental effect regardless. And you might have seen this kind of messaging in the lead up to the launch of the new runway, which is that the preferred mode is the over bay operations. This was messaging that has been communicated over and over again in the marketing and the community consultation materials. And if we've now, and this is also early work that we've done, trace some of this language from the early days, this is going back to 2006, this over water or over the bay mode is called SOP props. We see that originally it was actually intended to be the #1 mode for all time periods, daytime, evening, and night mode, both weekdays and weekend. If I now go forward, this is 2014, you can see that some of the disclaimers were relegated to the footprint, and in small print, it kind of says, well, it might be subject to climatic conditions. And now in 2020, all of a sudden, SOP props were removed as the #1 operating mode. And so this over water operation is not even attempted anymore between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. And here, this is the official noise abatement procedures for Brisbane. You can see that SOP props is only really a recommended mode between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. So a number of other flight path design criteria that were proposed have not been met, adhered to, and fulfilled. The first one is around flight paths that are not supposed to, where possible, new flight paths or existing flight path changes to occur over water where possible, especially where aircraft are below 5,000 feet. The second one was that where it is not possible for new flight paths to be over water, flight paths were supposed to be concentrated over uninhabited areas. That's not what's happening either. The third one, flight paths over residential areas are necessary, then residential areas overflown by aircraft to be minimized to the extent practicable. That wasn't apparently practicable either. And finally, residential areas overflown by departing aircraft should not, to the extent practicable, also be overflown by arriving aircraft. So you can see, whilst there's always like a little disclaimer that says where practicable, to the extent possible, etc., it seems nothing was possible. Now, fast forward to the TREX review that was done recently, those consultants actually disagree with that statement that where practicable. And so they came up with, originally in the draft report, 49 recommendations that could have been implemented immediately by air services at the time the new airspace architecture was launched, but they decided they didn't. They didn't want to. Perhaps it was more important to maximize profits. rather than to minimize noise. And another key issue that we've identified and we've learned about from a number of pilots, both current and retired pilots, is this notion of dirty flight paths. In this video, what you see here is the extension of flaps. So the dirty flight paths, and that's the lingo that is being used by pilots and ATCs, is the fact that Brisbane is quite unique in the requirement to have very low arrival flight paths. They are lower than at other airports because the flight path designers were very lazy. They left all the existing architecture in place that would have been completely unheard of at other overseas aerodromes. We heard from the tracks consultants at the community engagement sessions that any airport of the complexity of Brisbane would actually require an entire redesign of flight paths rather than just to muck around at the fringes and try and add the arrival and departure flight paths for this new runway to the existing complexity. So that means the existing flight paths were there, and the flight path designers were just undercutting in order to maintain those safety separation arrival flight paths. So that means pilots today need to lower their aircraft. When they're lower to the ground, that means more noise. When an aircraft is lowering prematurely, it means the flaps need to be extended sooner. The flaps create friction. The friction causes more noise ×2. And finally, in order to actually not just drop out of the sky, the engines need to be on higher thrust and higher power, which is causing more noise yet again. So we have 3 factors here why the noise penetration across Brisbane is even worse than comparably relatively at other airports. What we've also learned as a key issue is that a whole bunch of existing legislation that is currently in force is not being applied to Brisbane as part of standard international noise abatement strategies. So here you have just a selection. You can see this was just screenshots I've taken earlier today. The Sydney Airport Curfew Act is in force, the Demand Management Act is in force, the Noise Levy Act is in force, and the Airports Act has a number of community protections, including Airport Capacity Declaration, that is in force as well. Yet, whilst this legislation is available in Australia, it's not been applied to Brisbane. And we are asking the question why that is. Why is it that Essendon Airport, Gold Coast Airport, Adelaide Airport, Sydney Airport, all have curfews? We are told, for instance, that the airport is saying it would shut down the entire eastern seaboard, which is quite laughable even from industry insiders. We've heard that Sydney is obviously a city that isn't economically deprived. And we also have international airports such as LAX that currently have a curfew. And you wouldn't think that LAX, especially since they're hosting the Olympics much sooner than Brisbane, will all of a sudden shut down because there's a curfew that is protecting the residents that are living adjacent to LAX airport. So this is a number of questions that we are still asking the minister. Another issue that is for us, the growth trajectory of the airport. You can see here these different colors are the 3 main airports, Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. Sydney has already 2 runways. They have a natural cap because of the demand management and the flight cap at 80 flights an hour. The gray one is Melbourne and the blue one is Brisbane, but at the time with only 1 runway. So now with 2 runways and no restrictions in place, the growth trajectory for Brisbane Airport is 110 flights an hour. And that is a quote from their own marketing pamphlets that they're distributing to the aviation industry. So this would translate to about a flight every 2 minutes across all the different flight paths available. So this is something that's really important to understand. Those residents living under legacy flight paths, they were told that this would be a great example of noise sharing, right? Rather than having all the flights go over legacy residents, we are sharing half of them with those under the new parallel runway flight paths. But this kind of respite is very short-lived because of this very aggressive growth strategy that the airport is following. So we already hear from families and communities in those legacy flight path neighborhoods and suburbs that the respite is already over. The capacity has caught up and we have an excessive noise impact in those areas similar or even worse than what we had before. The vision that the airport is driven by is that of an aerotropolis. And this is the guy that came up with this concept, John Casada. He's been a long-term consultant to Brisbane Airport. He's also been consulting the Royal Schiphol Group more widely, because Amsterdam Airport, which is also owned by the Royal Schiphol Group in Amsterdam, they're also following this notion of the aerotropolis. It's pretty much not to have a city with an airport, but it's an airport that has a city attachment. And so if you go to this website, aerotropolis.com, and you look at this vision statement, you might want to ask yourself, is this really the kind of vision that we want to have for Brisbane? To give up the amenity and livability and let a private corporation turn our city into an aerotropolis. In essence, a lot of the evidence that we've gathered so far indicates that the noise is really just a symptom. It's symptomatic of a much deeper issue, and that is of state capture. We have the airport here as a private corporation. They are co-owned by a number of shareholders, and we look into that in a second. And they pretty much have a very tight grip control over air services. In fact, air services and Senate estimates have admitted and confessed that they are not a regulator anymore. While some of the members of parliament refer to air services as a regulator, air services themselves in Senate estimates have said, no, we are not a regulator. We've actually been corporatized, and we're a service provider. We provide services to the airport. That begs the question, who's actually still the regulator that protects communities? And the answer is there is none. We actually have a regulatory vacuum where the aviation industry is colluding with government entities in order to get away with these kinds of megalomaniac kind of developments, and community protections have fallen by the wayside. So to sum up this first section, some of the key issues we've identified, it's the inadequate community engagement, the 2007 environmental impact statement and the noise forecast therein did not match the lived experience. The overwater mode called subprops was quietly removed from the noise abatement procedures. We've experiencing a noise concentration over densely populated areas, some of the densest areas across Australia, by the way. Noise monitoring is using averages rather than peak noise in order to artificially lower some of the values. We're dealing with dirty flight paths. The legacy's idea of noise sharing didn't result in any ongoing and sustained respite or relief. There's legislative protections that are currently in force across Australia, but they are not applied to Brisbane. And we are constantly dealing with a passing the buck attitude with collusion and the regulatory capture or state capture. So we got our work cut out for us. Now, what have we been doing about it? Our work and our progress to date. We started off by doing a survey, and that was a very early snapshot. It's already started end of 2020, and the survey report was released in 2021. And earlier this year, we've done another edition of this with some of similar questions in order to have continuity and comparison between the data, but we've also included some new questions. And so this survey has been, the report has been released, and you can find it on our website. It does provide a very damning set of evidence when it comes not just to the noise impact, but also the repercussions on people's mental health, on their ability to maintain their livelihoods. When we talk about the airport being so great about economic productivity and tourism and so forth, what is never mentioned is that the inner city is actually where a large number of people live, and they also need to work, they also need to study, they also want to live there. And that loss of economic productivity and amenity is never really factored into the equation when it comes to the blatant PR spin that the airport is churning out. So this survey data provides both qualitative as well as quantitative insights into some of these repercussions. We were also, in a way, lucky that early on the Aircraft Noise Ombudsman agreed to do a multiple complaints review of Brisbane Airport. That was already decided at the end of 2020, and submissions were called for. And we thank everyone who's contributed their complaints and their feedback to the ANO. We made a very detailed submission, and that was fed into the ANO's report. We've been on an ongoing basis liaising with different senators and their offices in order to put questions into the Senate estimates process. And if you want some eye-opening reading, as well as some video footage that we've published on our website, head on over to the estimates website, where we've captured the answers as well as the recordings from the Senate estimates process. We've been engaging in political advocacy and been reaching out to MPs and the CEOs of both the airport and air services, and we've engaged and encouraged people to write letters to them. We've had a federal petition that attracted a number of signatures, not just from Brisbane, but because of some of the demands that we are calling on the, for instance, the changes to the Air Services Act. We also had the petition being signed by those affected in Sydney and Hobart and Melbourne and other areas of Australia. That was submitted to Parliament before the federal election. And we've provided ongoing input into the post-implementation review, as well as once it was set up, the Brisbane Airport PIR Advisory Forum. And that was taking a lot of time and effort of the committee, as well as our technical advisory group that we are very grateful for. As an aside, and just for your information, what people might have not noticed is that our submission to the draft PIR report actually contains in the appendix a revised noise abatement procedures for Brisbane. And those revised procedures reinstate subprops. We actually hired a technical advisor. We didn't pay $500,000 as the federal government paid for the tracks guys. Our technical advisor, though, is very well versed and works internationally on a number of flight path design projects across the globe. And he provided this submission that we've included in our document, which is the ability not only to reinstate subprops as the #1 operating mode that air traffic controllers are obliged to attempt as #1 priority, it's also bundled with noise abatement operating principles so that there is clear performance expectations and the very lax and lazy way that air traffic controllers are operating the Brisbane airspace, that we are moving much more towards one where safety and community protections are the #1 priority, not just making money. BFPCA is also concerned about what's in store in the future. You might have seen in the news that there is talk about drones. There's already a test site in Logan for drone delivery services, and we are seeing our Lord Mayor, Adrian Schrinner, who's an amateur pilot and aviation enthusiast, herald the arrival of air taxis. There's already been deals made for air taxis to come to Brisbane in the lead up to the Olympics. So in addition to the current and very aggressive growth strategy that the airport is following, we have a master plan at Archerfield Airport that is looking at the expansion of Archerfield. We're looking at drone deliveries being introduced into Brisbane and wider Australia, and we're looking at air taxis. So if you think the noise is bad right now, unless the community really sends very clear signals that enough is enough, there is even more in store at various altitudes and various noise levels. What we've also been doing is submit a number of freedom of information requests to various government entities. This one has been quite interesting. It probably doesn't surprise anyone that it's been submitting complaints to Air Services, and specifically the Noise Complaints and Information Services team within Air Services. The FOI documents that we've gotten back are the training manuals, how NCIS staff are being trained to deal with your complaints. And the training manuals reveal that they're actually trained to stonewall you. Out of about 250 pages of training material, there's only half a page that's dedicated to actually conduct investigations into noise improvements. When we then followed up in Senate estimates and we asked them, how often have you actually opted to investigate noise improvements? The blatant answer from Air Services was that they've never received the noise improvement suggestion in the 2.5 years that complaints have been submitted. Now, I know this is a lie, and this is not the first time that Air Services is lying in front of the Senate, because we have copies of those noise improvement suggestions that were submitted to the NCIS team. So the fact that they just blatantly are arguing that they've never received anything is just continuing their track record of holding Parliament to contempt. In the lead up to the federal election, we identified the federal election obviously as quite a crucial moment that doesn't come along all that often for us to leverage and exploit. And I think we did manage quite successfully to make aircraft noise a major federal election issue for the Greater Brisbane area. The scorecard that we've issued was sent to the LNP, the Labor and the Greens, and we've got our submissions and responses back. And you can read the original letters that we've got back on the BFPCA website. It's particularly interesting to revisit the letter that we got from Catherine King, who's now the Minister for Transport and Infrastructure, because some of these commitments that Labor made, we are still waiting for them to be translated into action, into reality. So we are in the process of following up some of these actions. In essence, these 8 key demands still stand. So we are after an independent airspace review. It is partly delivered by Tracks International that have now reviewed the airspace, and they've had quite a damning report in terms of Air Services' ability to actually engage in flight path design. We still want a ministerial direction to redesign rather than it being voluntary. We do want a Brisbane Airport Community Forum that is supposed to replace BACAG, which is currently the forum or committee that the airport is sharing as a part of their self-regulation. And you can see this is an item that all 3 parties have agreed to. We want a long-term operating plan. That is something that is in place in Sydney. And we are still waiting for announcements to be made around whether the PIR report is going to translate into an LTOP, a long-term operating plan. We continue to call for a curfew. Labor has the only party that have categorically ruled this out, which is surprising. And a number of people have pointed this out on Facebook already. When Anthony Albanese, our current Prime Minister, got into office, he actually commended the kinds of protections, including a curfew, that are protecting the constituents in his seat of Grayndler. So if you look at his maiden speech and you fast forward to Labor's position today, it is a very black and white kind of contrast. We are demanding an airport capacity declaration that would give us security and confidence that the airport is not going to just aggressively grow to 110 flights an hour, which would be completely unlivable. We do want the Aircraft Noise Levies Act to be applied to Brisbane. As I said earlier, the Act is already in place. It doesn't require any new legislation. It just requires to be applied to Brisbane, which the Minister at the moment is not doing. And we do want amendments to the Air Services Act because Air Services is colluding with the aviation industry. And so we need to go back to a system where we put them into CASA, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, and they turn back into being a proper regulator. We've also been writing to the Dutch Parliament, and this might come as a surprise, but this came as a recommendation from our sister organization, the Schiphol Watch Group in Amsterdam. The Dutch Parliament is an interesting entity because they have quite far-reaching privileges and abilities to scrutinize the Dutch government. Now, the Dutch government in turn is the majority shareholder of the Royal Schiphol Group, and they own Amsterdam Airport, as well as a big chunk of Brisbane Airport. So we've been writing to them to say that some of the principles around good governance and ethical business conduct that are actually in the legislation in the Netherlands, that they need to be applied, including to overseas investment. So in summary, the kinds of appeals pathways we are following are fivefold. There is the political advocacy to get the attention of decision makers and politicians. We want to grow our movement in order to amplify the voice that is done through community engagement, to build our numbers. We have been engaging behind the scenes in a legal review, and some of this work is ongoing. This is to understand what judicial appeals pathways are available to us, including whether we would be able to mount a class action. We've been engaged in technical assessments, and we have both the expertise of a technical advisor that is on a retainer, as well as a technical advisory board that is made up of current and former pilots and air traffic controllers and flight path designers. That's to understand how technically things can be improved. And the fifth appeals pathway is to look at shareholder activism, which is to lobby the BAC's investors to exercise additional pressure. And this is something that we'll investigate further in 2023, because a lot of the shareholders are industry super funds, which means it's money that you and I have in our super funds that is propping up the airport. So as a summary of what we've achieved so far with this level of engagement. So as I mentioned, we did manage to get the Aircraft Noise Ombudsman to issue a report. Now, you might kind of say, well, this report, August 2021, Air Services have said they accept all the recommendations and then nothing much happened. That is pretty much true, because the Aircraft Noise Ombudsman is very limited in their ability to actually exercise authority and make decisions in their own right. They are embedded within Air Services, and part of the demands for better governance is to get the ANO out of Air Services so that they are truly independent and they're given proper authority to investigate as well as sanction Air Services. That is work in progress. The other benefit from the ANO report is that the footprints and the sources were very, very detailed. That's been very handy for us, because with detailed dates and detailed document titles, we were able to submit a dozen and more freedom of information requests to get our hands on these documents. And a lot of these FOI requests are now coming back successfully. So that's been quite a benefit of having the ANO report published. The other benefit, I suppose, or the other outcome that we managed to achieve is that right in the lead up to the federal election, the previous coalition-led federal government started to feel the heat of the community pressure, and they announced, and it's nice that the ABC put it into quotation marks, an independent community forum, and that turned into what's referred to as BAPAF, the Brisbane Airport PIR Advisory Forum. They've recently wrapped up their work, but again, it's the second entity that has, in essence, confirmed that our complaints are legitimate. They've confirmed that the community was misled, that the noise forecasts are inadequate, and that something needs to be done. So the fact that our concerns have been vindicated is, I think, a hard success. And then the third entity that also confirmed not only that our complaints are legitimate, but that Air Services has failed the community is the TRAX International group of consultants that were hired, and this is a quote from Senate estimates, for over $500,000 for about 4 months' work, January to April. This year they worked on this. I think they actually came back and engaged in further community engagement, so I wouldn't be surprised if at the next Senate estimates round, we will hear that the actual cost has probably exceeded $1 million. The report that they released outlines 4 work packages and a number of recommendations. The very first question we've been asking is, why hasn't this been done right from the get-go? Why did it require these overseas consultants to come in and tell Air Services how to do flight path design? In Senate estimates, Air Services is saying it's their bread and butter. Obviously, they are lying. It can't be their bread and butter, because they've actually let go of the most senior air traffic controllers and flight path designers as part of a tax write-off, part of a redundancy scheme that they got approval for from the ATO. So insiders and whistleblowers have told us that the most senior people have long gone, and what used to maybe be their bread and butter 20 years ago is really now best outsourced to people that know what they're doing. This is now the latest report that came out, which is the final PIR report that Air Services released on the 14th of December. And those are the 4 work packages around strong, transparent, and representative governance, which we very much support, maximizing flights over water, reducing the frequency and concentration of flights over communities, and the wider airspace review. I mentioned the letter that we received from now Minister Catherine King. This was when she was in the office of Shadow Minister. And what is notable is not only the support for that Brisbane Airport Community Forum, but also the fact that they are committing to updating the aviation white paper. Labor is committed in governance to delivering a new aviation white paper of the kind not seen since Anthony Albanese was minister in 2009. That white paper set the scene for a range of the consultative mechanisms now in place, but we recognize that more than a decade later, they require a refresh. The kind of consultative mechanisms that this letter talks about is in essence BFPCA, which is the self-regulation community sham forum that is made up of hand-picked representatives that are constantly saying that there's nothing to worry about, the airport is great, when are we going to have more flights to Japan? We did manage though recently to have a little breakthrough, and I'm counting this as one of the small wins and small successes. So we have 3 community-aligned members now appointed to BFPCA. Those are the members nominated by the MPs for Brisbane, for Ryan, and for Griffith. And we also have 2 now sitting on ACAG, which is the similar forum that provides community consultation for Archerfield Airport. If you're a member of our Facebook group, you might have seen some of the reports from those members. I know some of the members are in our webinar today. So I'm very, very grateful for those members that have joined BFPCA. In essence, it's largely a shit show. But it's very good to have those members on there to make sure that what used to be pretty much a meeting of the airport's fan club is now starting, at least it's starting to provide a little bit of scrutiny and resembling a more genuine community voice, which is really good news for us. We've also managed to keep the issue alive and in the media. In my new role as chair, I've been doing a number of TV and radio interviews. We've been talking to journalists for print coverage, and you can see the rolling coverage on our website under bfpca.org.au/media coverage. We've also looked at the bigger picture. This is an issue that is not unique to Brisbane. The same issues are currently being experienced, and the same trickery and the same tactics are being used for the Badgerys Creek Airport at Western Sydney, which is of huge concern to those residents. And in fact, a number of them have joined our group and our mailing list and our Facebook discussion group in order to better understand what some of the underlying issues are. Because in essence, they are saying that Brisbane's present is their future. A number of these groups across Australia have formed, and we are a founding member of the CAAA, the Community Aviation Alliance Australia. And we've also currently got friends status that we are upgrading to membership status on the Union Européenne contre les nuisances aériennes, which translates into the European Union against aircraft nuisances. And you might have seen us post some promotions of webinars that they are running that are quite useful, and we had one of our committee members join and present to them in return. So in terms of our achievements, we've built Australia's largest aviation noise community group. We've actually outperformed Sydney and Melbourne in terms of the numbers of people that are fighting this issue, that are affected. We've got 3 independent entities that have confirmed that our complaints are valid, and that something very fishy is going on here. We've made the Brisbane flight path noise concern a major federal election issue. The federal government spent more than $500,000 on the tracks review. We got 3 community-aligned members appointed to BACAG. All 3 main parties agree to creating a Brisbane Airport Community Forum. We do have continuous media coverage, and also more recently interest from ABC Four Corners that I briefly mentioned in our newsletter. And we know from insiders and from whistleblowers that we are posing a real challenge to Australia's aviation industry cartel. You might have also noticed that the airport is going into overdrive with their PR and advertisement. There is bus shelter advertisements, there is radio announcements by air services. So a lot of the PR that is being invested right now is in order to try and counteract the reputational damage that is being caused by the airport's aggressive growth strategy and the excessive noise pollution. So those are all really good achievements, and we are very grateful for all our volunteers, supporters, followers, those that have donated for this. So thank you very much. It wouldn't have been possible without every one of you and members more widely across our mailing list, Facebook groups, to be able to do this work. So what is next? You've seen that whilst we have a couple of small wins, we are nowhere near where we want to be. I was recently asked by a journalist, what's your goal? And I said, our goal is to shut down BFPCA. I want to go back to being a professor at QUT and being a beekeeper on weekends. And I think a lot of the committee members and volunteers feel the same. We don't actually want to do this work. We are forced to do this work because of what's going on here in Brisbane, because of the colluding aviation cartel that we are dealing with, because we are being stonewalled. So our main goal really is to be able to reduce the number of compliance to a level where BFPCA isn't needed anymore. That would be kind of an ideal scenario. One of the things that has already been launched and that is ongoing is the noise sharing campaign. You would have seen by now that one major proposal in the PIR report is to push the noise to new communities that are currently not affected. And this is just history repeating. It's actually right now a situation where a lot of these communities have no clue that this is coming. Air Services is not investing a single cent in proper, genuine community engagement or communication. There's no ads, there's no information coming. You pretty much have to self-select and self-subscribe to their archaic Engage portal. And you've got to know that that even exists in order to find out that noise sharing is in store and has already been adopted by Air Services for a number of communities. So we will continue ringing the alarm bell, recruiting more members that are concerned about this, to say that there's far better options that need to be implemented first. And we've already outlined now a number of those, both legislative as well as technical changes that need to be made. We've also written to the Minister. Minister King is now 201 days in office today. And since we've sent our letter 26 days without that we've received a response, we continue to follow up. And I know, because we get CC'd into a lot of the compliant emails, a number of yous are following up with her as well. But she's very busy because she's busy working with the aviation industry in order to push through this new aviation white paper that I mentioned earlier. So there is this website that's already up there that is announcing a 2023 edition of it. If you want to be consulted, you got to email this address, aviationwhitepaper@infrastructure.gov.au. Otherwise, they will just email their mates in the aviation industry and ask for feedback. Communities are largely underrepresented. And I'll show you an example of what engagement looks like when it just goes according to the department's wishes. So here is already photos. The Minister is very busy holding roundtables with the aviation sector. This was posted on the 23rd of August on the Minister's Twitter account. And similarly on Facebook, we are partnering with industry to make aviation even more competitive, efficient, and apparently sustainable. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes that we are not privy to. where the minister is already working with the aviation industry. We are still waiting for her to tackle the issues here in Brisbane head on, but we won't let go. And I know that all of you will continue to make yourselves heard as well. So this 2009 white paper that is now getting an update, what actually was the impact of that previous white paper? In essence, it was nil. One of the key sentences in that white paper is that the government has reinforced the recent airport master planning processes, the ongoing importance of effective noise management strategies, and get this, including the need for a periodic review of the need for a curfew at Brisbane. Now, Labor has already ruled out the curfew altogether. So whilst the Labor-led Rudd-Gillard white paper from December 2009 suggested we should have a periodic review of the curfew, there is not going to be any more review. It's off the table according to the Labor position statement. There was one review though in 2013, and this is what it looks like. Brisbane Airport will be one of the few non-capacity constrained curfew-free capital city airports. That's what the Executive General Manager for Aviation is saying. And this 2013 review suggested that the proposed nighttime curfew was rejected because the new parallel runway is expected to significantly reduce aircraft noise. I mean, you just got to pause for a minute and let that sink in. The review committee rejected the notion of a curfew because of the new runway, and the new runway will reduce the noise for Brisbane. Now, we know that that's all entirely nonsense, but if you look at the membership of the committee, you can understand why this nonsense was published. So we have here the Deputy Secretary Co-Chair is from the Department of Infrastructure. We got the Deputy Director General at the time for Tourism of the state government. We got the Manager of City Planning for Brisbane City Council, and we got the Chief Executive of Tourism and the Transport Forum, plus the Executive General Manager from Air Services. So it is a very well represented committee that conducted this curfew review, very well representative of the aviation industry cartel that is colluding in order to get away with these things. Next time this happens, we won't be asleep, we will pay attention, and they won't be able to do this again. So in terms of the learnings, this is really the kind of journey that we've been on, and we got to act accordingly. I know that a number of people that have joined, it is very therapeutic and cathartic to post screenshots of the planes that are going across, and that's what our discussion group has largely enabled, because if you try and do this in some of the neighborhood groups, there's a lot of trolls that will just probably tell you to suck it up and to not worry about it or to just move away. We've all experienced that kind of abuse. So yes, our group is still a safe haven for people to engage in peer support, but we've also all going to be on a collective learning journey. And the learning journey really is like this. You complain to Air Services and nothing happens, because what we've learned now is that FOI documents provide evidence that Air Services staff are trained to stonewall us. So then we've escalated our complaints to the Aircraft Noise Ombudsman. The Aircraft Noise Ombudsman have done a report, but we've now learned that the ANO is powerless because they're embedded within Air Services and report to the board of directors. Then we engaged in PIR workshops and we've made 1 million submissions. Nothing happens of substance because everything that is actually really, really powerful has already been excluded from the scope of the PIR process from the get-go. So meaningful actions are excluded from the outset. And now we've been escalating compliance to the federal minister and nothing happens either, because the Australia's aviation cartel has really taken control of government policy making, and that's what's called state capture. What BFPCA believes is really important is that everyone follows this learning journey and understands that noise and the planes are really just a symptom. It's a symptom of a much deeper issue, and everyone needs to be able to understand that that's what we got to target. That's what we got to address in order to get anywhere. So for 2023, what we got in store is to redirect noise complaints. You can continue to complain about the noise, but as we've just learned, complaining to air services just goes nowhere. So we're now actually just going to cut our losses and not waste energy with air services because they're utterly useless. What we want to do is escalate our complaints to the Department of Infrastructure and Transport. And this has to be done in a very specific way, because if you complain about the noise to the department, they will just redirect you. So we will complain about something else, which is the failure and the inadequate regulatory oversight over air services. BFPCA will help and assist. We'll provide templates and evidence material to back up and to support these complaints. And we ask everyone, once it's ready, to direct their complaints via this service. Once you make a complaint to the department, they have compliance procedures and they need to be followed. So we will then await a response. Likely the response is going to be inadequate yet again, but that response is necessary for the next step. The next step then is to go to the Commonwealth Ombudsman. The Commonwealth Ombudsman is different to the ANO that we've been dealing with. The Commonwealth Ombudsman is much more independent and has more authority and levels of scrutiny to look into what's happening inside government departments. So that is allowing us to escalate compliance to the federal government outside the existing sponge that they've created. You can think of air services like a compliance sponge. It sucks up all the compliance and it just makes them go away. It just gets filed into nirvana. What we're also planning on doing is go after the shareholders. And we've already seen that we've written to the Dutch government as the majority shareholder of the Royal Schiphol Group. And I also briefly mentioned that we are all likely co-owners of BNE, of Brisbane Airport, through superannuation investments. So this is the breakdown of the current investors in Brisbane Airport Corporation. We will provide a list as well as a breakdown of which super funds are invested in Brisbane Airport, because if you look at those ones, they in turn have their subsidiary and affiliated super funds. So it's a little bit complicated to make sense of, but we'll try and cut through this level of complexity, and we provide a very clear information campaign for you to be able to ascertain whether your super is invested in the airport, and then make submissions on the basis of being a shareholder of the airport, as well as referring and referencing the ESG principles. ESG stands for environmental and social and governance, and those are principles that all the super funds and investment companies have subscribed to, yet we are dealing here with entirely unethical business practices that are based on lies, deceit, inadequate community engagement, and misleading the community. So that is a very stark contrast to what the United Nations refer to as ESG investment principles. So this is in store for 2023 as well. And you can see here some of the complexities as well as evidence that this is a national thing. Brisbane Airport here is in the lower left corner, and there's connections to Melbourne, Perth, Sydney Airport. We've also been drawing some of those links with Hobart Airport that is owned to 70% by the Queensland Investment Corporation as well as Royal Schiphol Group. So expect more on the shareholder activism issue as we're going to progress into 2023. And finally, we also just have to prepare for community protests and rallies. The level of effort that has been now invested in being reasonable, I think has been exhausted. We've made submissions, we've written to all the different entities, we've pleaded, we've reasoned. The demands that we've put forward are very, very reasonable. We've had the peer reviewed and verified by 3 different entities, including technical advisors. So we are really at the end of the line with some of the reasonable ways that we can argue on the basis of a rational thought and process, due process. So if due process isn't working for us, the only other democratic option for us is to engage in community protests and rallies in order to demonstrate strength. We do need to build the movement further, but we also are planning a number of actions that we can engage in order to disrupt the airport, in order to make ourselves heard. And the examples that you see here of the 90s protests in Sydney, they give us a bit of a template. I think the records show that there were about 8,000 people engaged in the Sydney protests. They also had a lot of support from the local government, which here in Brisbane is entirely absent. But I believe we are able to manage quite a bit of community activism and protest if we are quite smart about it. So do await further news and announcement on this point. Also, if you are interested in helping out and joining, or if you have specific ideas, do let us know. What was, for instance, quite interesting is that recently, some of the people from the 90s protests in Sydney have reached out to us, and we are actually in touch with some of the original organizers that mounted some of these protests, which has been just a complete treasure chest of insights and advice. So that is, I think, definitely in store for 2023. And this is my summary of what's next. We do want to grow the movement. We are using those information campaigns to appeal and to hopefully alert those currently unaware of what's in store to join BFPCA and support our work. We are expanding that noise sharing information campaign. We hope that we will eventually meet with Minister Catherine King, and we will let you know once we get a response from her. We are wanting you all to redirect complaints to the Department of Infrastructure and Transport and then to the Commonwealth Ombudsman in order to escalate and exhaust that very last complaints avenue that we haven't explored yet. We are continuing behind the scenes on the legal review, and we are currently evaluating options for class action. I can't go into further detail into those discussions because of legal privilege, but I'm just letting you know that this is happening. I mentioned the shareholder activism to target the super funds that are currently co-owning BAC. We are preparing for community protests and rallies, and we hope that everyone will sign up to the SMS list, because for community protests and rallies, we've got to be quite quick. So we need a communication channel that can reach you in real time. And in essence, we all want this to amount to calling for a royal commission that will investigate this rotting mess and collusion that is the aviation industry cartel. This is really just a sliver. If you consider the news around the baggage handlers, the exorbitant bonuses paid to executives at Qantas, to the delays at the airports, to the way that staff were made redundant despite a huge amount of government subsidies, and the list goes on. The aviation industry has a lot to answer for, and noise is really just the tip of the iceberg. So I think there's definitely substantive evidence now amounting to call for a royal commission into the aviation industry and the absolute failure of regulatory oversight that is unfolding here. Now, before we go into Q&A, a couple of slides, just how you can help BFPCA in our work. The very first thing that I say all the time is we need to be able to reach you. So I know some people are on our Facebook discussion group. Some people are following the page, which is different. We have a Facebook page and a Facebook group. Some people are subscribed to the newsletter. We also have some followers on Twitter. Ideally, we want everyone to be on the newsletter via their email and just be signed up to the SMS list, because that's going to be increasingly crucial for 2023. So if you want to make sure, you can head over to our contact page, and all the links are there so that you can subscribe to social media if that's what you want to do. But do make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter. That's going to be vital information for us. We also got to engage everyone in asking why questions. And you already seen throughout this presentation, I've been asking why questions a lot. Here's another why question. Why doesn't Australia have high-speed rail? And this was recently in the news, this cartoon by Wilcox. I'm sorry, you'll never get a high-speed rail line through here. There's an airport in the way. And it really captures the state capture, pun intended, of why we can't have nice things in this country. Because the industry is in control. You can see a little evidence here. They're not even hiding it. So you have this commentary piece written by David Higgins saying that high-speed rail is a bad idea, it will never work. And then the next article the next day suggests that he's actually on the board of directors of Sydney Airport. So this is very common, and we need to stop letting this happen. It actually becomes the new normal in Australia, and more people need to call this out. So reading up and learning about asking these why questions, this page is really good, the Australian Democracy Network, that talks about how do we confront state capture. You've seen reports on Four Corners and other investigative journalism programs that looked into the mining industry. It looked into the casinos and the regulatory failure of the Star Casino in Melbourne that was investigated by the New South Wales regulator because the Victorian one was captured. And you got other kinds of examples of royal commissions. The aviation industry has a very high reputation generally, but is engaged in the same practices. We got to understand what those practices are in order to be able to fight them. I also recommend this book by my colleague, Dr. Cameron Murray, and his colleague, Professor Paul Freitas in the Netherlands, Rigged: How Networks of Powerful Maids Rip Off Everyday Australians. Whilst his book doesn't have a section on the aviation industry specifically, what he's described in the book is pretty much, in essence, exactly what we are dealing with here. We are also calling for more volunteers. In the lead up to the federal election, we called for volunteers to help us with the usual electioneering stuff, which was handing out our scorecards, doing letterbox drops, manning polling booths, and so forth. We are now changing this call slightly. We're actually after, ideally, people with specific skills and expertise. If you have expertise in accounting, finance, investment, ESG principles, shareholder activism, do let us know. Similarly, if you have background in legal, regulatory policy work, requesting and reading and scrutinizing FOI documents, we'd love to hear from you. We do have quite a well-functioning and diverse technical advisory board. We're always after new members to join that advisory board, those with aviation expertise, for instance, pilots, air traffic controllers, current or former ones. We can assure your anonymity. You can join a separate forum that we got set up in order to enable communication on that technical advisory board. If you got background in noise and acoustics and data visualization or data analysis, that would be very handy for us as well. And as has happened in the past, we are always keen to speak to people that know people. So influencers, if you are in touch with them, if you know them in various positions, let us know. That could be journalists, it could be politicians, senior advisors, investors, directors, decision makers, power brokers. That's very handy for us to be able to get our message across. Also recently, it's been would have been very handy to have someone that speaks Dutch. So if you are fluent in Dutch, that would be handy too. If you are able to contribute any of these skills, so if you've got different skills that you think might be really useful, do head over to our website /volunteer, and you can submit the form there. You can also just email us anonymously on contact@bfpca.org.au. And this is just a summary of the different web addresses. So to sign up to our newsletter, it's /sign up. The SMS distribution list is SMS. The different take actions will populate onto the existing take action page. We're also always keen to have people donate to keep us afloat financially. as well as the volunteer page /volunteer. And with this, I'm gonna have a bit of a pause and head over to questions and answers. I'm gonna leave this slide open and just gonna open the Q&A. So you would have seen in your interface, there is a Q&A button, and I can already see there is a couple of questions that have already been answered and 3 open ones. So I'm gonna go through there. And I think Troy has answered some of the questions. Okay, so the first question here is from Mark. You're doing an extraordinary job, and you have my gratitude for all you and BFPCA are doing. Thank you, Mark. My question is this: the Greens have power in the Senate to influence government policy, but Max at the last community forum indicated that they are not interested in horse trading on aircraft noise. Is there an opportunity for BFPCA to influence a change of heart here from the Greens, as the primary reason the 3 electorates around the airport went green is aircraft noise? Look, Mark, I think you're very, very right. Considering that there is horse trading going on when it suits them, but not when it comes to aircraft noise, is definitely a weak point that we need to address and further escalate with those 3 MPs, as well as the 2 Queensland senators. BFPCA is in touch with the Greens, as well as with the Shadow Minister for Transport and Infrastructure, Senator Bridget McKenzie. And you've seen that we've reached out to Minister Catherine King. So we continue to maintain a political yet non-partisan approach to the matter. We do encourage everyone, especially those that are constituents, as in living in the seats of those federal divisions, to reach out to your MP and let them know about how strongly you feel about this. And we, as the BFPCA committee, are doing further work behind the scenes as well in order to get this matter escalated. So you're very right that definitely deserves further attention. I do note, though, that even though horse trading, for want of a better word, is a instrument that we should exploit, the other thing to keep in mind is that if you are not a Greens voter or Green supporter, do keep in mind that we do have a Labor government right now and a minister who could enact a lot of change right now without any horse trading. It's actually within the ability of the minister to declare Brisbane leviable under the aircraft noise levy legislation. It is within the ability of the minister to set an airport capacity declaration, to issue ministerial directions. There is a number of things the Labor government could be doing, and they decide not to. So whilst I completely agree with your point that the Greens have currently not engaged in horse trading, we're also dealing with a coalition government that could have been doing stuff when they were in power and chose not to, and a new Labor government that could do things right now, and they've so far chosen not to either. So all 3 main parties are not the ideal ones. Perhaps if we are still dealing with this issue at the next federal election, we might have to form our own party, like what happened in Sydney. There was at the time the No Aircraft Noise Party, but let's see what happens. The next question here is from Peter. I'm sure I'm not alone in being overwhelmed with the incredible work that's been done by the key members of BFPCA. One question I have, however, as a family primarily impacted by the turboprops in North Brisbane, I continue to be confused as to why the forgotten cross runway is not more visible in our lobbying for improvements. Is this a conscious omission, or has revisiting or returning this runway to operations been deemed unrealistic or lower priority than other initiatives? Tracks were excluded from considering it as part of a solution, but I believe it must be reconsidered to counter the assertion around wind direction that dictates the majority of planes fly over our cities is being considered. We have been considering it within the technical advisory group, Peter. I will, as a follow-up from today, put it back to our group and see what the responses are. I do believe there are benefits from having that cross runway reactivated. I suppose the concern might be that it's opening up new flight paths that might be more suitable to noise abatements without that it actually necessarily reduces some of the other issues. So we got to just do a bit of a assessment of the pros and cons of looking at the situation where, in essence, we would be advocating for Brisbane to have 3 runways, 2 parallel and 1 crossway, whether that is a good idea or whether it can backfire. So that is a bit of a contentious issue, and I'm going to refer to the technical advisors to see what they might come up with. We got a question from Jeff. At the last PIR meeting at Kapalaba, Air Services confirmed that 90+% of southbound, eastbound, and westbound departures are affecting the city of Redlands. Why is the Redlands city not also a high priority? We don't prioritize any one area. Our main message really is people before planes. And so we do not want to engage in oppression Olympics or noise turmoil Olympics, where we engage in which is the area that is more important. Is it Redlands versus Balmoral? Is it Upper Brookfield versus Samford? We got to agree that the underlying causes of all of this are not just about noise and decibels and whether it's 70 or 75. The underlying causes are far more important to address. So Redlands, as well as the Bay Area, are very much on our radar. We've been right from the start, when BFPCA was first founded and later on incorporated, said that we will advocate on behalf of all residents affected by aircraft noise. So we don't have favorites. You might have seen that certain members of parliament make it look like we are pushing for the one or the other agenda, and some of the private news outlets are doing the same. That's not actually what we are on about. If you go to our website, if you look at all our messaging, it's always been to be in the same boat and united against the corporate agenda that has been driven here by the airport and the industry super funds. We are very much aware of the overwater departures cutting across residential areas, and that is something we want to see addressed. In fact, examples show that the technology that is in place, which is the satellite-based navigation, can be used in order to avoid residential areas altogether. So if you use Flight Tracker, for instance, and you watch Sydney Airport in operation for a little bit, you can see how they are actually being guided to go over water and to not hit any of the residential areas. Here in Brisbane, we have these lazy air traffic controllers that are just cutting through residential areas because they have no performance obligations around noise. The entire performance assessment is about making money, and we need to urgently address this. So we definitely hear the voices of our families and communities across Redlands, but also on the other side, Redcliffe and other parts on the other side of the city. So I hope that answers your concerns. Question from Freya: any further thought on a single issue candidate from within BFPCA? No, particularly because the election for the federal government has wrapped up, and we are looking at now the local government elections in, I believe, March 2024, and then the state elections later in 2024. Whether anyone would come forward on this issue is probably questionable, because at the end of the day, it is a federal policy. We do, though, think that both local government and state government have particular abilities to support us, and they are not doing that right now. So we will, again, be paying very close attention to the incumbents and the candidates at local and state elections when the time comes. So at the moment, we are focusing on some of the issues that I've outlined because they've been on the back burner throughout most of this year, as we've been focusing a lot of our energy and attention on the federal election. But whether there's going to be a candidate coming forward, we'll see. BFPCA would be very happy to support such a candidate. So if this is you, or you know someone that would be interested, do reach out to us, and we'd be very happy to talk to you. A question from Anonymous. Is there a way financial planners can influence super fund shareholders if they having many clients in the funds? I might have to take this question on notice. I'm sounding like someone in Senate estimates now, but I don't have that expertise to be able to answer that. So I believe that there is a number of people that we've been talking to that have engaged in shareholder activism, and they might be able to provide some advice on this. But yeah, I'll take this forward and see if we can get some more, if we can shed some more light on this. A comment from Frank. You mentioned the aviation cartel. However, the cartel is regulated and administered by our government. This should be made clear. Also, community power can make this a one-term government. This should be front and center in any discussion with the minister. This is not a threat, but a position forced upon communities. Yes and no. Our messaging really is that what I conveniently call a cartel includes the government already. That's really in essence what state capture is about. So if you can see and they're not even hiding it, if you see the messaging around roundtables, submissions being called from industry, we are working with industry, and the list goes on, the rhetoric that comes from government is that they are very much already in cahoots with the industry. There's no separation anymore. There are statements in Senate estimates from air services that they're working very, very closely with the airport, and there's no regulatory oversight in the traditional definition of the term. So I take your comment, but I also think that far more scrutiny and regulatory oversight needs to be applied, and at the moment that isn't happening. We got a question here from our MP for Brisbane. No, sorry, Stephen Bartlett. I was just thinking, looking at Stephen Bates here. My apologies. Stephen Bartlett asked if the grand plan is to have an airport with a city surrounding it, that is tourism and tech businesses, to offset the reduction in mining royalties, Queensland government revenue shift, then managing the increase in frequency and level of noise must be the focus. I wonder if the cost of noise-proofing dwellings in Sydney will spook shareholders. So shifting flight paths and using newer, quieter planes makes more commercial sense for investors, question mark. I think the idea of noise proofing is, and this has been brought up a number of times, it is quite contentious because we are living in a subtropical climate where we do want to be outdoors a lot of the time because our climate is quite conducive to an outdoor lifestyle. There's large areas like New Farm Park, other public parks that you can't noise proof. Not everyone wants to live in a sound insulated home, if that's even possible. Lots of the number of the homes are very difficult to noise insulate anyway. I do think the point around the cost of it is interesting, and so we will take this on board as an interesting comment and good feedback, because it can be fed into the costings of different options of saying, well, if you don't give us this, then this is what you are up to. So, well, thank you for that. Question or comment from Paul. Thanks for your leadership. Well done. Thank you, Paul. Can we get an outline of the Sydney aircraft noise community, repercussions, and perhaps how long that took to arrive, pun intended, at the end-use curfews, and the ongoing repercussions and concerns? Yes, if you go to the Sydney Aircraft Noise Forum website, which is hosted by the Department of Infrastructure, I might post the link into the chat later. You get a bit of a historic overview of how it came about. One thing to note just quickly is that it happened much quicker than what we're witnessing here. So we had the protests, and if you look at just the year of the Commonwealth legislation that's in place for the Airports Act, for the Demand Management Act, for the Curfews Act, for the Levies Act, they're all from the mid-90s. So you'll see that in very short succession, legislation was passed in order to provide Sydney residents with protections. And then the long-term operating plan was created over about I believe, a 12-month period. So the website of the Sydney Airport Community Forum has a lot of that historic detail. Another question from Anonymous: the flight path tool which BAC released prior to the new runway showed distinct pathways. However, after the runway opened, I was informed by BAC staff the flight paths have a leeway of 3 kilometers, so the aircraft can fly anywhere within a 3-kilometer distance from each flight path they showed. Only after compliance did they add this information onto the flight path tool. That is correct. Is it correct they have this leeway, and doesn't that mean they can pretty much fly anywhere through the center of Brisbane? That's entirely correct. So the original flight path tool didn't have those disclaimers. Under the pressure from and the reputational damage that BAC is facing from the community, they increasingly have added further disclaimers and pop-up windows. So if you go to this little bogus flight path tool that BAC has got online, it now says it can't be trusted, can't be relied upon. Aircraft can fly 3 kilometers left and right. It's pretty much an admission and confession that the tool is entirely useless. So you're very right there. Question from Simon: what specific activities are planned to supercharge growth in community support? I feel that I'm part of the same small active core, but we are not able to get critical mass. I genuinely feel that there are large volumes of supporters who are time poor and need an easy way to show their support for our cause. They won't give up the time needed to write or email their issues. Can we revisit a petition that requires only a quick tick and flick? That's good feedback, Simon. I do think that having a couple of very easy, low-hanging fruit community engagement options is certainly something we want to incorporate into what we want to do in 2023. Because we are leading up to state and local government elections, we could, for instance, explore petitions to those 2 entities. In fact, just simply calling for both local Brisbane City Council and Queensland State Government to support these issues and to advocate on behalf of their constituents. That's definitely something we should be able to do. The other comment I might just add here is that whilst we have a continued influx of new members to our various channels and newsletters and so forth, we also sadly have attrition and turnover. So people are fed up and have started to move away. And you would have probably seen some of those comments in the community group, which means that there's also now people leaving the mailing list or the Facebook group, which means that we just have to continuously engage in mechanisms to then recruit and reach out to those that have moved into the area. So that's something that will be an ongoing task for us. If anyone has expertise or interest in that, do come forward either via our email address or our volunteer sign-up page. So thanks, Simon. Question from Anonymous: our success will depend not only on your amazing work, but numbers. Would newspaper ads or TV commercials help create awareness for BFPCA and the information you provide? I know this would cost money and require donations, but is it worth investigating? So similar question to the previous one, we will look into some further avenues to grow the movement. Yes, newspaper ads and TV commercials are expensive. TV commercials are very expensive. So we'll have to consider whether people are willing to donate. We did have 2 rounds of donations, but you've also seen from those donation pages that whilst we have thousands of people, only 200 people have donated. So it's good that we managed to get that amount of money together to keep us afloat and to invest in the kinds of resources that we've provided in the lead up to, for instance, the federal election. We'll revisit this for 2023 and see whether another round of donations might enable us to do some more promotional work. I do know we are out of time. I'm going to go through some of these questions. I know people have to go, but we've recorded the session and we'll make it available. So if you do have to run off, we will have some of the Q&A in the recorded session. There is a question from Peter. This presentation is great, but the stated 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. For over the bay is inaccurate. It is actually 5 a.m. in the noise abatement procedures. GAM flies a 50-year-old lawnmower. That's true. With wings on average 3 days a week in turboprop areas, how can such a small operation not be stopped? Very true. The noise abatement procedures that are read out are for the jet operations, and there are those exemptions for turboprops, which is very, very problematic because they are just as loud, if sometimes not even louder than the jets, and they are on very specific flight paths that are on low altitude and over residential areas. Our submission to the PIR included quite specific suggestions that we want air services to implement. And what I mentioned earlier, the revised noise abatement procedures do the same thing as well. So we will continue to pressure air services to not just kick the can down the road, but actually implement those revised NAPs for Brisbane. Steve asked, thank you for an informative and intelligent presentation. I would certainly like to see the presentation video made available for public consumption. I have a number of deniers who I hope would see the facts and evidence presented so well by you and your team and take the situation as being real and not conspiracy theory. Great work. Thanks for that comment, Steve. Yes, we have recorded the session and we'll make it available. Chris is saying, thanks for everything, Marcus. As you mentioned, there are lots of trolls on the community Facebook page, and attempts to reach more community that way has been quite distressing. This seems to be quite a polarizing topic. How do we communicate with community, particularly about noise sharing? We have started to discuss this. At the end of the day, there's always going to be trolls on whatever issue communities are fighting for. We shouldn't be too demoralized and put off by that backlash. One of the things that we haven't been able to do, but it is on our to-do list for 2023, is to create a Mythbuster page on our website, so that at least when you are facing the usual responses, like the airpod was there before you, why don't you just move away? We will have researched responses for some of these knee-jerk reactions that hopefully will go some way of people who wish to engage to provide responses, even if it's just sending them to that Mythbuster page. And I'm just looking, this is probably the last question that we've, there's one more that just kicked in. Question from Anonymous, thank you for the update on your work, which is really important. I'm keen to see action next year to address 1, the ministers not doing their job and public role, and 2, how do we stop corporations from dictating the development in Brisbane? The community voice needs to be welcomed and have a place at the table for meetings. That's a very good comment. Not only have we now realized that this is not unique to Brisbane, the aviation industry issues are going nationally and even internationally. The other thing that I haven't even mentioned here in the presentation is that the very inadequate community engagement is also a very strong pattern across Brisbane and Southeast Queensland. There is one group that we've been talking to and liaising with, which is Brisbane Residents United. Do check out their website. They've also been building a movement of different community action groups, and BFPCA is one of them, that are residents fighting different planning issues, where often they just get steamrolled by corporations pushing through whatever planning proposal is coming through. Sometimes Brisbane City Council is letting these things go to the Land Court. The Land Court is then ruling in favor of the developer, and then Brisbane City Council can use the Land Court decision to say, oh, see, we are very sorry, but the court has ruled in favor of the developer. We just got to let this development go through. So especially in the lead up to the local government election, there's going to be, I think, a very particular focus on the overall state of planning, urban planning in Brisbane. And if you've seen the submission that Brisbane Airport Corporation made to council about the Bulimba Barracks development, you can see some of these frictions in the system where it's about developer versus corporation, and the community is often just at the receiving end. So that's definitely something that is part of those underlying concerns and issues that we got to address. A question or comment from John. Greens members have suggested that they will make available access to research via the Commonwealth Library. That is correct, John, and we've been using some of these offers of assistance. They are talking about the Parliamentary Library, which is quite a wealth of information that can be accessed when it comes to historic information, documents, and so forth. And we have started to use the offer of assistance from the MPs. Michael is saying, hi Marcus, great work from BFPCA to date, thank you. I realize much of what we focus on is noise, but I can't help thinking that people should be more aware that this is ultimately a government issue. And even though BAC has had involvement, the work they did through the IS and community consultations on behalf of the government, I think pushing the government being responsible for the lies, like they did with the NBN, might get some extra traction. I agree. I think BAC as an incorporated entity, it is in their remit to be a commercial entity and to be making profits. There's nothing wrong with that per se. However, there are ethical business practices that we are concerned about. The major buck passing ends with the minister. And so as the person in charge of the governance arrangements of the legislation, it is really Minister Catherine King now that is the target for us. Paul, what's the end game? Opinion only. As I mentioned earlier, the end game in essence is to make ourselves go away. If the level of complaints have subsided to a level where we cannot continue our movement because people are not upset, then we kind of take this as an indication that perhaps things have improved. But right now, the complete opposite is the case. We have very distressing emails. We have complaints that are going full swing. Air services sending the police into people's homes when there is a suspected case of self-harm or suicidal ideation. That's the extent to how they care. It is quite distressing to see some and to be copied into some of the complaints. And the duty of care from government is completely absent. We are looking at how we can direct, as I mentioned earlier to the comment, the focus towards the minister, because Catherine King is the one that has the powers to do a bunch of things to protect communities, and at the moment she has decided not to. Another question from Anonymous. A lot of the argument is around the noise issue, but should we also be stressing pollution issues? Is there research about this? There is, especially the local groups in Sanford and Upper Brookfield have started to engage in research around air pollution and water contamination. So if that is of interest to you, please reach out to us and I can put you in touch, and we can put you in touch with groups that have looked into those issues. We are also fortunate that here at QUT, Professor Lydia Murawski is one of the Times 100 women in research and an air pollution expert. And we've started to have some dialogue with her about aircraft and air pollution. So there will be more information coming on this issue in the future. There's a longer comment from Max here. Thank you, Max, our MP for Griffith, for joining us. I think it's very important to note that the only times we have leverage in the Senate is when the government is trying to pass legislation and don't have the support of the coalition. In this instance, we can negotiate for concessions that are related to that legislation. For instance, last week on the energy bill, we managed to get funding to help people transition their appliances from gas to electric. But there isn't scope to push for concessions that are unrelated to the legislation. But if there is any bill that is related to the aviation industry, you can rely on us using any leverage we have to push for better outcomes for Brisbane Airport, including better outcomes for Brisbane Airport. I think Max is probably wanting to say better outcomes for Brisbane communities, including a curfew or cap on flights. We will also be bringing back our private members bill to legislate a curfew cap on flights and long-term operating plan for Brisbane Airport. I'm really glad to see Marcus highlight project actions for next year. As I've said before, for us to win, we need to build more public pressure like Sydney in the 90s. Thank you for those clarifications. Max, and thanks for joining today. Question comment from Anonymous. I'm glad they are concerned about people's mental health, but it still needs to be improved. I myself suffer from mental illness. Yes, I agree. And the level of action, considering that at the moment what we are dealing with is really just Band-Aids, is still lacking. So we need to follow this up. Thanks for that comment. Another comment from Max. I also want to reconfirm that my office will use any resources the community needs to help organize and build large protest actions next year. My personal suggestion is a large protest out the front of the freight terminal, and we will continue to make any other resources that might be useful available, like the Parliamentary Library. Thank you, Max, and yes, we appreciate that level of assistance. Anonymous says, for the comments from Max, I agree regarding protest actions. What about a general strike in Brisbane? Again, it comes down to numbers and whether it's possible to motivate enough people to actually have an impact. We've been looking at a number of community activism types of actions that can be very impactful with smaller numbers, whilst large numbers are very visible. And so the impact comes from the visibility. You would have seen examples on the complete other end of the spectrum. So for instance, Violet, that protester in Sydney that paralyzed the Sydney Harbour Bridge for 25 minutes and was jailed under the New South Wales protest actions. That was one person. Obviously, there's other people supporting that person. But you can see that it is possible with smaller numbers to be able to cause disruption. Obviously, what we want to engage in is peaceful protest and legal protest. I think our community is very much attuned to engage in action that is compatible with the demographic that we are dealing with. And so we are currently exploring those options. I think this is the questions for now. I'm going to close the webinar. We've kind of went over time. We might do another webinar with more time for Q&As next year. Thank you all so much for joining us. I still see there's quite a number of people in the tuned in. Thank you so much for joining. Do have a relaxing, to the extent possible, festive season and summer break. BFPCA isn't really shutting down because we're not a business. So our Facebook group is open, the discussion continues, and the compliance email will continue to operate and function as well. So if you are bombarded with excessive noise pollution from the flight path, do make sure that you make yourselves heard and watch out for more actions coming in 2023. If you have feedback for how this webinar went or for any other part of BFPCA's work, do flick us an email. It's been very hard recently to get back to every single one because we literally get hundreds of emails every day. But please do continue because we do read them and we try to get back to everyone eventually. So thank you very much for tuning in and have a great night.